Hey everyone, welcome back. Today we're talking about yet another beginner-friendly saw, the jigsaw. A jigsaw is a really versatile saw because it can pretty much make all the cuts that a miter saw and a circular saw can make, plus it can make curves and shapes. So let's dive into everything you need to know to be able to use this saw and create some really awesome projects. Let's go. If you want to cut curves or shapes for a project, or if you want to cut a large hole in the middle of a piece of wood, then a jigsaw is what you need. A jigsaw can certainly cut straight lines as well, and it's a great beginner saw if you are just starting out and if you are not yet ready to invest in a miter saw or a circular saw. It is less intimidating, and in many ways it is considered safer as well because the blade is always moving underneath the surface of your project. One of the great things about a jigsaw is that you can easily switch out the blade, and the type of blade you use depends on the type of material you want to cut. So you can essentially go from one material to a different material really quickly by simply switching out the blade. Now let's get to know our jigsaws a little bit better. I have two models of jigsaws. This is the Ryobi corded jigsaw and this is the battery operated DeWalt jigsaw. They have very similar features. The way things are operated are very similar, but there are certain differences as well. So if you have a different brand or different model, you do want to make sure to take a look at your user manual to make sure you understand how your jigsaw operates. Now, let's talk about the parts of a jigsaw. So a jigsaw has a thin long blade which moves up and down as you make the cut. You can cut many different types of materials depending on the type of blade you pick. You can cut woods, hardwoods, softwoods, you can cut metal, vinyl, laminate, PVC pipes, a lot of materials. And we will get into all the details about blades and how to change them and what kind of blade to look for in just a little bit. But this here is the shoe or the base of the jigsaw, and this is what rests on the workpiece as you make the cut. You can also bevel the base of the jigsaw. So depending on the model of the jigsaw, you can unlock the bevel control and set it at an angle so that you can cut a bevel. This Ryobi saw has hex bolts that you need to loosen to be able to adjust the bevel angle. This DeWalt saw has this lever right here that unlocks and you can easily change the bevel. But if you are making straight cuts, you want to make sure that your bevel angle is set at 0 before you start making the cut. Here is the handle and you hold the jigsaw like this to make the cut. Now a jigsaw can have various speeds and cutting action controls. The speed control is how fast the blade moves. High speeds are used when cutting soft materials. Now, this is the cutting action control. There are two types of cutting actions, and your jigsaw may or may not have both of them. The first one is the straight action, where the blade moves up and down as you make the cut. The second is the orbital action, where the blade, in addition to moving up and down, during the cutting stroke, it also moves slightly forward. This allows for a much more aggressive cut. The cut is a lot faster, but it is a lot less smooth. The orbital action is great for cutting softwoods or plastics, but you should never use them for hardwoods or metal. Now this is the on and off trigger of the saw, and if you have a variable speed saw, you can actually control the speed of the saw by how much you push the trigger. But the maximum speed that it will go to will be defined by the speed that you set right here. This trigger lock button helps lock the saw in the on position. So you don't have to continue to press the trigger as you're making the cut, and you can give your fingers a break and focus on making sure that your saw follows the cut line. When you are done, you can simply press the trigger again, and that will release the lock and turn off the saw. Now let's talk about blades. There are many different types of blades available in the market, and it can get really overwhelming to pick the right blade for your project. But the right blade makes all the difference in the quality of cut you get. First, let's get the shank of the blade out of the way. There are T-shank blades, U-shank blades, and universal blades. This is a T-shank blade, and almost all manufacturers now use this kind of blade. It is basically how a blade is held inside the saw, and the T-shank blade is super easy and quick to switch out, as well as a lot more reliable. Like I mentioned, the blade that you use depends on the type of material you are cutting. Usually, the blade will say on it what it is meant for. Like this is the thin metal blade, this is the thick metal blade, this is the general purpose blade, this is a fine finish wood blade, and this is a fast and clean wood blade. One other thing to note is the TPI, which stands for the teeth per inch, which is basically how many teeth does a blade have. It usually says on the blade exactly how many teeth it has. Like this one here is 10 TPI and this one is 6 TPI. The lower the number of teeth, the faster it will cut, but the cut will be rougher. The larger the number of teeth, the finer the cut. Now, one thing to remember is that most jigsaw blades make cuts in the upstroke, which means that as you're making the cut, the top surface of your board is going to get splintered. Now, one of the solutions to avoid that is to turn your board over as you make the cut so that the splintered end is on the bottom. But that is especially hard, especially when you're working with shapes and curves, because it's a lot more intuitive and easier to draw the shape on the good side of the board. Now, there are blades that are reverse cut blades, where you see the teeth are actually pointing downwards, which means that the blade will make a cut on the downstroke. This will keep the top surface looking nice, but the bottom side will be splintered. Now there's another type of blade, and I can't believe that I did not find this blade before. It is called the top and bottom cut blade, or the dual cut blade. This has teeth pointing in both up and down directions, making it such that both surfaces are clean and free of splinters. One last thing before we actually start cutting is the width of the blade. The width of the blade decides how intricate a pattern you can cut. Because as you make the cut, you need to turn the blade around, and the width defines how sharp a turn you can make. If the blade isn't thin enough, it will get jammed as you try to make a very sharp turn. So you need to either use a thinner blade, which are also called scroll cut blades, or you need to make relief cuts, and we will talk about that in a bit. Now let's operate the jigsaw. Now before you start operating the jigsaw, you want to make all the settings for the material that you're cutting. But of course, before you make the settings, you want to make sure that the battery is not in, or if it's a corded saw, the cord is unplugged. Now I'm going to be cutting a pine board, so I have my saws set at the orbital setting and at the highest speed. Now let's add the blade. The mechanism for adding the blade once again depends on the brand of the saw. In this Ryobi jigsaw, you simply push this lever, insert the blade in here all the way, and let go of the lever, and the blade is installed. To remove the blade, you simply hold the blade and push the lever, and the blade pops out. You want to make sure that you're holding the blade though, because if you push the lever, the blade can simply fly out, and that can be dangerous. On the DeWalt over here, you can simply open this lever and insert the blade, and the blade's in. Now that the saw is ready to go, let's go ahead and talk about how to set up your material to cut. It is very important to clamp down the material that you're cutting. I usually simply clamp it to my workbench. When the jigsaw operates, the blade moves up and down, causing the entire saw to vibrate, and the vibrations will transfer to your material. And as you're making the cut, if everything's vibrating, it will cause not just errors in your cut, but it can also be dangerous. And this is especially true when you're cutting thinner materials. So you want to always be mindful of the amount of overhang you have over your workbench. What I usually do is I set it up so that there is an overhang that allows me to cut a decent amount of the pattern while keeping the board stable. And as I get close to the table, I will turn it around and cut the rest of the material. Now you do have to be careful if you don't want to damage your work table. As you can see here, I definitely damaged my workbench a few times, but it's just a workbench and that's okay. Now let's make the cut. But as always, before you start operating the saw, safety first. Be sure to wear eye protection, hearing protection, and protect your airway. And of course, no loose clothing, jewelry, or hair. And please do read the manual for your saw before you start using it so you are familiar with your saw. Now let's make that cut. Making the cut is pretty easy. You rest the saw on the material, line up the blade with the cut line. Don't touch it to the line just yet. Then you just turn on the saw, let the blade reach full speed, and then start making the cut. As you make the cut, you want to make sure that the base lays flat on the material and you are not applying excessive force to push the jigsaw. Let the blade do the work while you just guide it. And that is basically how a jigsaw works. If you apply force, the blade can bind. It can cause what is called drift, which is basically where the top of the cut looks good, but the overall cut is beveled. This is because the blade is pretty flexible and any pressure can make it bend and mess up the cut. Now, if you are making a straight line cut, I recommend to always use a straight edge guide like a speed square or a level or just a board to help guide the saw so you can be assured to get a perfectly straight line. Now let's talk about cutting large circles. I'm going to create a starter hole towards the inside of this circle large enough for my jigsaw blade to fit inside. And then I use my jigsaw to make the cut. Now I am using the scroll wood blade for this to make it easier for the saw to turn and cut a clean circle. Now let's talk about how to cut a rectangle. Once again, I'm going to make a pilot hole, but this time in the center. Then I make relief cuts to each of the corners. I can then make relief cuts and cut out the rectangle easily. And then I can just come back and clean up any corners. I hope this tutorial has given you the confidence and the skill to tackle your next project with a jigsaw. If you like this tutorial, please do give it a thumbs up so I know that you found it helpful. And let me know what tool would you like me to talk about next. See you next time.